So before we begin tonight's event, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I'm Rhiannon. I live and work on the lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka, which is the easternmost member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The city I'm in is commonly known as Montreal, but its original names are Tiohtià:ke to the Haudenosaunee and the Muniang to the Anishinaabe. And for us as a literary and health humanities series, we just like to take a moment to reflect on and remind ourselves of our collective responsibility toward education and reconciliation. Before we meet again for the next month of Cross-Pollinations, the annual Blue Metropolis Literary Festival is taking place here in Tiohtià:ke, and it will have an amazing Indigenous Voices series that includes both in-person and virtual programming. So I encourage you all to take a look at the program. There will be some amazing readings, discussions, and panels by Indigenous poets and authors from all over. I'm going to just put the link in the chat for anyone who's interested. Ah, thank you so much, Nick. Um, yeah, and there's also some really nice artwork by a Métis artist on the Indigenous programming page. So we'll get started with the event tonight. As I mentioned, my name is Rhiannon Ng. I am a poet and a medical student, and I curate Cross-Pollinations in collaboration with Mick Jones, who I will now pass the virtual mic to for more on the series and on tonight's event.
Thanks, Rhiannon. And thank you for that land acknowledgement. I'm really, really excited to learn about that festival. I've just popped open the link and the programming is really exciting. So yeah, extra encouragement to check that out. So welcome to Cross-Pollinations. This is a virtual monthly series that brings together writers and poets and health workers for themed conversations around illness, ability, and care and differing art practices. As Rhiannon said, I'm Mick. I'm a poet and a curator, and I love working on this series in particular. It always just brings a lot of surprising and insightful conversations. So we're really excited for everyone who's joined us tonight. And this one is a very special Cross-Pollinations. We've taken a bit of a conceptual turn to approach translation as a care and creative practice. We're so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to be joined by writer Claire Foster and psychotherapist SJ Thiessen to think through the art of translation alongside the act of translating embodied experience essential to therapy and counseling. We begin with a reading from Claire, followed by a talk from SJ, and then our two guests will join in discussion around translation, reflecting on each other's practices, and we also welcome audience members to drop any questions throughout the night in the chat, and we can address those during that period. And now it's my total pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Claire Foster is a reader, writer, and bookseller at Type Books. She is also a literary translator from French, most recently of Pierre Clémence's, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, 1973 prison memoir, A Few Personal Messages. Her writing and translations have appeared or are forthcoming in the Hopkins Review, Public Books, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Full Stop Quarterly, and the Kenyon Review. Her translation of Valerie Manteau's novel, The Furrow, is forthcoming from Invisible Publishing. Born and raised in Ohio, she lives and works in Toronto.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored, and thank you so much to all the organizers. And I'm so thrilled to be here with SJ. I am going to be reading from the translation that Mick mentioned. It is from a novel that won the Renaudot Prize in 2018, as they said, and I am thrilled to not only have the opportunity to read a section that has been published in English already in the Hopkins review, but I've taken the opportunity tonight of this to translate a new section from the opening pages, and it's been really fun to do that. And I might say a little bit more about this when I begin, but it's fun because I'm going to read mostly from this part that's been done. That was the first part of the book that I did the translation from, which is in the middle. And then at the end, I'll announce when I'm doing this. I'm reading just a short paragraph from the opening pages. And it was fun to realize in this opening section, that is the last thing I'm going to read, is a phrase that it's the origin of a phrase that is used in the first thing that I'm reading. So it was like a nice thing. And if you want to keep your eye out for a tongue-in-cheek line about how men could stand to die a little too, in terms of violence against women. There's that. So that's really fun. So yeah, this was a novel that was published in 2018, and I'm just going to be reading a bit from the translation. Hopefully, the point of this is just to bring a little bit of my translation practice to the screen, and yeah, I hope everyone enjoys. The only context I'll give is it's sort of this like auto-fictional thing. The narrator, who's also named Valerie, is working on a book project about a man named Hrant Dink, who's a real person who was assassinated on the steps of his new newspaper, which was called À Gauche, which means Sillon, which means the furrow, which is the title of the book. And he was assassinated on the steps of his paper in 2007. If you live in Istanbul or Turkey, you know about this guy. You refer to him by his first name. And she's started to work on a book project sort of swirling around the notion of him, his death, his life, the legacy, and also the tensions that she comes up against as sort of like being this insider, outsidery person, white girl from France. So I'm going to read a little bit. Hrant, according to translator Dominique Ede, addressed his reader not as one person in need of persuading, but rather as two people in conflict whom he hoped to bring closer together. Karen Karakashli, his longtime partner at À Gauche, says he, quote, invented a language that wholly seized nationalism by the throat, end quote. I flip through all the translations I can find in English and in French while sitting outside my favorite cafes, where I seem to attract frequent demonstrations of sympathy from neighbors and servers. Erol, the souvenir seller just next to Café Muse, is the only one who doesn't hide his disappointment. If you write about Hrant, there won't be any room in your book for me, even though you promised. I ask if he has any stories about Hrant, but he shrugs. I'm just a humble shopkeeper. I point out that Hrant himself had a slew of businesses before going into journalism, but Errol doesn't want to be a character in a book about Hrant. I remember the day I saw on TV that he'd died. I didn't know who he was, but I heard it was an Armenian journalist killed by a Turk, and trust me, it was the first time in my life I'd ever felt so Turkish, so ashamed of being Turkish. I'd be happy to play the villain, but in a story. Whatever your thing is, it hits too close to home. Errol's souvenir shop is trying to change with the times, as Westerners are scarce and have been somewhat replaced by tourists from the Gulf region who, in addition to buying traditional soaps, napkins, magnets, and tchotchkes, acquire calligraphies that Errol can't read, but which he sells as authentically Turkish. I'd sell anything, he says, as long as I can take some time off and ride around with my friends. I ask whom he votes for, but he dodges the question. I don't do politics, I'm for peace, I just want everyone to respect each other, that's it. He still does some politics, though. I mentioned the Syrian guy he'd hired, but eventually asked to leave. He'd wanted to do his prayers, and he entirely has that right, Errol contends, but he couldn't just abandon the store like that without letting me know. And then he bothered customers at Muse because the music was too loud. It was all too much. It's a shame because it was nice having someone who could speak Arabic to customers, but there's always trouble with Middle Easterners. Hearing him say this, I burst out laughing, but he doesn't know what he said that's funny. Just so you know, it's Europe here. The difference between East and West, writes Hakan Günday, is Turkey. I don't know if Turkey is the result of subtraction, but I do know that the distance that separates East and West is as wide as the country itself. And within this space emerges a third path, which occurs in any space between two things, without which Europe wouldn't be Europe, and the Middle East would be seen as a flat, illegible mess. Errol tried to hire Faris, who's tired of making coffee at Muse, but Faris declined without a second thought. The ridiculously low rate wages, 12 hours a day, 6 days per week, plus his total indifference towards the work. And why not shine the shoes of Emiratis too while we're at it? Errol gets it, but he can only bemoan his own situation because, of course, he too would prefer to have a garage filled with old motorcycles and to live closer to Izmir, spend the day doing nothing. Like you, by the way, who lives the dolce vita. I wonder what it is you see in this place. If I weren't stuck here, I'd be long gone. If I had a foreign girlfriend, easy, I'd marry her and we'd go to Europe. You see, the problem with having me in your book is that I have no intention of dying for this country. Errol's wife comes into the back where we're chatting quietly, scowls at me, and in an ostensibly polite gesture, she takes away our cups of tea as if to get me to leave, all the while proposing I have another. But because I insist on leaving now, despite the rain, she gives me a henna, pressing the ball of paste into the palm of my hand and tells me to dig my nails in and hold on tight for as long as possible. Afterwards, one can tell by the color of your hands if you're a loyal woman. I walk out into the rain, henna in hand. It's already dark. I pass by Muse again, and the street seeps, wet and ominous. I'm soaked. Muse is locked. But I see there's still some light upstairs, and I have no desire to walk all the way to the bus stop that would take me back to the Asian side. I holler up, wiping off my makeup that must be a mess by now anyway. The voice that answers sounds off. He says he'll explain, but right now he can't come down. He's going to throw down the keys from the window. He mumbles, his voice dark, though I assume I've misheard. Hopefully I won't hurl myself down along with the keys. The window opens, the keys fall. Miraculously, they don't fall onto the awning. I collect them from the gutter, take the stairs normally reserved for employees, and from the back of the room, I'm welcomed by a groan and the sound of a slumping body. I take off my shoes, drenched, grimacing as I pass the mirror. He's sitting on the edge of the couch, pale, looking at his shoes. What is happening? I don't know, he says. I felt like clearing my head. I took some stuff. I'm really not okay. I touch my hand to his clammy forehead. What can I even do? I pour a glass of water and get some aspirin, but in the time it takes for me to get rid of that stupid ball of henna, which has now turned my fingers scarlet red, he has lain down. I crouch next to him, holding the water, and I wonder if I should call the doctor. But what doctor, with the few Turkish words I know without knowing what he took? What are you looking at? He grumbles. He says that his mind is racing. He can't make it stop. This must be it when people claim to see their whole life flash before their eyes. I am going to die. At least I want him to leave the country. He wavers, gives up on finishing up the sentence. What a shame to die now. My brother was going to visit tomorrow morning. He mumbles again that he's sorry I have to see him like this, but it's better than having left me in the rain, no? I agree, and he looks reassured. He seems so stressed by the idea of dying before I'd gotten shelter that I feel compelled to tell him that even if he had died, I wouldn't have blamed him for the rain. He sighs as if I'd just handed him the last rites. You're being such a drama queen, I say, caressing his forehead as one would a child. Come to bed. I'm cold. I slip into bed beside him. He stumbles through an incomprehensible muddle of Turkish and English, then quiets. After several minutes of total silence, I put my hand on his chest and he jumps as if I were about to strangle him. What now? I wanted to make sure you were still breathing. That doesn't mean anything, he hisses, returning at once to his coma. He doesn't let go of my hand. Minutes pass. Then he regains consciousness, climbs strenuously up my forearm as if mounting a steep hill, finally arriving at my sleeve. Take off your clothes. Now this is funny. I'd really like to see him try to have sex in this state, so I go with it. Outright hallucinating, he says that he's seeing double and this brings him back to life. What luck, a threesome I can't refuse. As loquacious as he is unintelligible. He rises, but just as soon as his feet touch the ground, he collapses. He dissolves into laughter. I can't stand up. Incredible. He asks me to get his cigarettes, and I tell him, you can't be serious. You aren't going to smoke on top of all this. Of course I am. He hoists himself up and sits on the edge of the mattress as if it's a cliff, gingerly lighting his cigarette and asking me to keep a respectful distance so as not to get burned. He is extremely careful not to burn the bed nor the rest of the furniture. Careful, careful. I love these exaggerated gestures, and he laughs without seeming to know what's funny. Stop laughing at me, I'm dying. Behind his eyes is a joy I haven't seen in a long time, and he grabs me by the feet, kisses my knees, my hips, my sex. Come here, I want to make love. When I wake up the next day, it's already noon and I'm alone. If it weren't for the glass of water and aspirin still on the coffee table, I would think it was I who'd hallucinated. But on my skin lingers the distinct vibration of last night's embrace. I tell myself that if, for whatever reason, I got pregnant from last night, I would keep it. At this point, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. That child would look like us, a brat sprung from the edges of consciousness. I go downstairs. The four of them are sitting around the bar, and they welcome me with smiling, cheerful faces that are at once a little mocking, a little friendly. I tell him he looks better than he did last night, and he tries to look serious, but I can tell he's still a little high. I'm curious, I venture. Do you even remember what happened last night? He looks up at the sky. Thank God, yes. Puffs out his chest and preens like a child. I was really good, wasn't I? There's a section break. Then there's a short section I'm going to read, and then there's the new bit, all in the next 8 or so minutes, okay? The city moves in slow motion. Some shopkeepers are closing early so they can go to dinner. Certain cafes have temporarily stopped serving alcohol. It's Ramadan. That's my parenthesis. I wonder if I'll have to part ways with my reading spot on the benches facing the sunset in Uskandar. But I note that the tea vendors in this conservative neighborhood are still keeping busy despite their fasting. I linger here one evening with Hrant Dink under my arm, and when the time comes to have a drink, the motorcycle comes by to pick me up. I love riding into Musa's courtyard as if passing through the Blue Mosque's monumental driveway as the sultans once did, staying up on their horses just to make a spectacle of it. Childish pride. I take off my helmet. In lieu of driver's license, we have invested in brand new helmets, betting on the fact that cops would never stop motorcyclists who have two helmets and wear them. The general rule is to ride with no helmet or with a helmet attached to the handlebars. I wave to those I see outside, Birkin and the small group of cartoonists for Andor Muse who are pretending to work in the sun. Anna is alone inside behind the bar. She hardly responds to my hello, grabs a glass as she pours from the percolator. I see her hand trembling. It's strange. I've never seen her like this before. She really is shaking. As she puts the full cup onto its saucer, she can hardly stop the shaking, and the coffee narrowly lands on the bar. I ask again if she's okay. She scrupulously cleans the side of the coffee machine. It's as if she didn't hear me. Anna, are you all right? There was a weird guy who came by just now. She didn't want to say more. She makes a gesture that indicates we're no longer alone, but I carry on anyway, waving over the others. What do you mean, a weird guy? She puts a finger to her mouth to say no, and then she surrenders. At least wait for them all to be here, so I don't have to repeat myself. A guy came in this afternoon when there was no one here. He came to the bar and grabbed me. He dragged me to the storage room and took me by the throat, and I wanted to fight back, but he hit me against the wall, and then I remembered that I should just yell, so I screamed and he left. He just left. I want to say something comforting, but he cuts me off. What do you mean that happened here? What, this afternoon? With the guys outside? No, they hadn't arrived yet. There was no one here. He raises his voice, but why didn't you call us? She shakes her head no. He slams his helmet on the bar. Where is he? What does he look like? She starts to explain, but he cuts her off. Increasingly furious, did he speak Turkish? What was he wearing? Would you recognize him? She says, yes, of course, he's been here before, but why didn't you kick him out right away and call the neighbors for help? I see her begin to cower and it breaks my heart, and now it's my turn to yell, fuck, it's not her fault. He shoots me a glare and leaves to take his anger out on the group of artists sipping their beers outside. Now it's all hands on deck. They're all riled up, going up and down the block, scanning the passersby. Anna stands in the doorway, trembling, arms crossed over her yellow dress. As if he would come back right after, I say, and then what? They're going to kill him? She shrugs, and why not? Men could stand to die a little too. That's the line we're going to hear in like 2 minutes, just saying. Whoop, whoop, whoop. That's what I got for a footnote, guys. Anyway, they could stand to die a little too. I ask if she wants to go home, and she says she wants us to go somewhere else, but she refuses straight away. Absolutely not. I want to stay here. I work till 10. She's stubborn. No way she'd leave her post, and in any case, she doesn't want to go home. She asks us not to tell Faris, who will just get upset if he finds out about this. He'd already made a comment this morning about her dress. I'm horrified. But she says she'd like some vodka if I can find some. I accept the mission. Passing in front of his store, I alert Errol, who seems at once sorry and not surprised. He says, not the least bit maliciously, girls, what can you do? You know what happens. We have to live with it. I want to smash the bottle over his head. I go back to Muse. The cartoonists have returned to their table, resumed their conversation, and now have the nerve to ask for a drink. Birkin is alone at the bar and asks if we can watch the security camera, see if his face was caught, but of course the cameras aren't set up properly. The images are useless. I say we have to report it anyway, but he winces. You know that the cops are just going to make things worse. I insist that they do something, but what? In any case, Anna doesn't have valid papers, so forget the police. It'll only cause problems for all of us. I think about this. Anna stays quiet. Birkin seems distraught. Errol closes his shop and comes over, no doubt to show his support, but when he hugs her, all he can say is that her yellow dress during Ramadan probably wasn't the best idea. And now I'm really fed up listening to them explain that it's too much to expect anything better. There are assholes everywhere, that you have to be realistic and protect yourself. A rift erupts among us. Stop making this face like we're defending the guy. We're just trying to say that these apes are at home here. None of your feminist theories can do anything about it. The least bit of skin is provocation enough for them, simple as that. Do you think we enjoy this? Welcome to Turkey. Their voices get louder, and Anna, panicked, apologizes, and I'm furious at the guys for taking her apology as proof they're right. Birkin must think that speaking to me as if I were a toddler will calm me down. The other just pretends not to hear, but I can tell he's annoyed, on edge, and Birkin ends up asking me to go home instead of going hysterical on everyone. No way. He says he doesn't want to hear me in this state. What state? Because I'm angry? Because I'm upset? Don't we have the right to be? I repeat that we should go to the cops and that if none of them have the balls to do it, I'll go with Anna myself. But he says in Turkish, and for the first time ever, the language is unambiguous, clear. I understand each and every word. If she says one more time that we need to go to the police, I'm going to lose it. He starts to raise his arm, but stops midway, a gesture that I interpret wrongly, perhaps, as if he were going to hit me. I throw his helmet on the pile of newspapers on the ground, and suddenly he yells, "Get the hell out of here. You don't understand anything, and you aren't helping anyone." So that was the clean section. Now, just for the sake of fun, a blooming translation early draft. I'm going to read one paragraph from the opening pages where we hear that line again that we already did. That also sort of accidentally connects to this sort of like violent theme I've unfortunately brought on all of us. But yeah, c'est la vie, right? Okay, this is the paragraph. Early draft. You don't need to know anything. These are characters. It's fine. Okay. Sarah went back to Gaziantep with Ibrahim. We barely had a moment alone together. She declares that we must schedule regular calls starting now. She's worried because I was stupid enough to tell her that since I'd arrived in Turkey, I'd swapped my regular psychoanalysis with yoga classes and that I wasn't finding myself that much worse off, apart from, of course, recurring nightmares. Now, never say, even to a friend, especially not a psychologist friend, that you're hearing voices. Problem? I'm adding some high speed data. Okay. Hopefully that's fine now. I've just done something. Now, never say, even to a friend, especially not a psychologist friend, that you're hearing voices. I mean, I hear voices in my head, Sarah. It's nothing. Just like a little cartoon bubble with music notes. Because I'm alone every day. And I have to have someone talk to me in my mother tongue. It's in French, then you know who it is? It depends. People who exist or don't, the dead, the living too. I recite texts to myself. And you think you can tell the difference between these voices in real life? Yeah, yeah. I can't have her start patrolling me. You signed the petition for the girl in Adana? I'll send it to you. As soon as she says it, I see the email arrive in my inbox. A slogan with an exclamation point, Free Silem! And beneath it, in capital letters, a phrase in Turkish I don't understand, already more than 100,000 signatures. Look at that face. Bleached hair, thick, black eyebrows, both raised, and a completely closed expression, head high, and an overall toughness. Her face a dare. A pair of policemen on either side of her, handcuffed at the wrist. A t-shirt that reads, in English, Dear Past, thanks for all the lessons. I painstakingly try to decipher the argument in Turkish at the same time that Sarah describes it to me. 9 years of domestic violence, she tried in vain to get protection from the police, and ultimately she used the gun that was threatening her to kill her husband. To the microphone that asked her if she regretted it, she responded simply, Why is it always women who have to die? Men could stand to die a little too. Excellent proposition. Sarah laughs. This country drives people insane. In any case, the t-shirt speaks to me, and worn like Selim wears it with this relentless pride, her desperation turned to action. And in smaller print just below, we can read the words, Dear future, I am ready. Okay, that's the end of my reading. Thank you. And sorry for the tech problem. I hope that was okay.
Thank you so, so much, Claire. You also solved that tech problem so fast. I think like we barely noticed that it was there. Um, yeah, those scenes have so much texture and voice, and the characters are so alive. Um, as Mick said, like your reading style is so captivating. So thank you. And I also found it striking the scene near the beginning where the narrator is trying to call for help, desperately wanting a doctor or help, but just can't find the words, can't find the language because they don't speak the language. And I'm sure there are many metaphorical places we can go with that discussion later. Um, just a reminder to all those in the audience that if you have any questions or comments as we go, feel free to write them in the chat, or you can send them privately to Mick or to myself, and then we'll get to them during the discussion and Q&A. So now I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, SJ Thiessen, psychotherapist and social worker. He is a curious and non-judgmental listener, witness, and holder of stories. SJ has the privilege of collaborating with their clients in building narratives, strivings, meanings, and embodiments in people's lives, relationships, and communities. They see themselves as a sidekick in exploring possibilities, navigating dilemmas, and listening to hearts. SJ's is a practice of radical politics. He strives toward an ethics that resists indifference, an ethics of generosity, dignity, and loving justice. It nourishes SJ to smile at strangers, hold the door for people when they are an awkwardly long distance away, and greet friends with embarrassingly enthusiastic two-armed waves. Bring the mic over.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for all being here. That was really beautiful, Claire. I was furiously writing and just everything that kept kind of coming up for me. I'm not sure how what it'll generate for us, but it was really beautiful. So thinking about what I was going to offer today gave me this permission to kind of spend time thinking about my practice of care and creativity. And it was really a really wonderful experience to spend time talking to people, gathering ideas, phrases, and intentionally being with my practice. And so I'm actually really nervous to do this. So I'm going to do like a breath thing, but I'm not going to start with a deep breath in. I learned this new technique. I'm just going to start. You can join me if you want. I'm just going to exhale through my mouth all the air out of my lungs, and then I'm just going to relax and see what happens. Okay, so I'm just going to like, okay. So basically, that just gives you a really good inhale rather than inhaling first, because when you inhale first, you're already holding your breath. Anyway, really appreciate. I learned that thing on a podcast or something. Anyway, I want to start by situating myself. I'm not an expert or a specialist. I'm just, I know some things. I love to learn things. I am a psychotherapist and a social worker. Um, I'm also a psychiatric consumer, and openly so. So it's from this position that I do my work and that I speak from. Um, and I like Rhiannon just said, like I have this beautiful opportunity to work with people to explore and heal and grow and do whatever they want to do when they come and hang out with me. And generally what I do is I just tend to ask a lot of questions. Actually, somebody the other day asked me, can you ask fewer questions? And um, I appreciated it. But I also don't ask really to find out the answers. Like I'm not asking like for anything right or true. And I hear people say, like, I don't know the answer. It's like, well, maybe there isn't one. And it kind of comes from this idea that this quote from James Baldwin, and he says, the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. And when I think of that, that kind of guides my practice. And so sometimes we're in this search for answers and we forget about all the other possibilities. We're looking for singularity, and we contain complexities and multiplicities. And there's so many options, opportunities, stories, ideas that we contain within us. And so I guess the question I was thinking about today is kind of like, how do we make meaning and translate our mental, emotional, and physical experiences of distress and pain? And what does that mean for our practices of care and creativity? And I wanted to start by just sharing that, like, when I ask people how they're feeling, I often get things that are actually judgments or evaluations, like I'm feeling fine, or I'm feeling shit, um, or I'm okay, which I don't know what that means, rather than like an emotion or a sensation, like I'm feeling fear or numb. And I think that that makes a lot of sense given our sort of present social, cultural framework of um, psychological pain and distress. Because we don't actually get to do a lot of translating of ourselves from the inside out. We rely on a very specific explanatory framework and lexicon to make meaning of our embodied experiences of pain and distress. And this model situates psychiatric pain and distress as health. And so we have mental health and we have mental illness, which kind of sets up a bit of a binary, although we talk about it being a spectrum. It's sort of like, you can be ill or you can be well mentally. And this kind of configuration is linear and attempts to account for and explain what we're going through. And it draws analogies between physiological things, like a illness, an injury, a broken arm, or diabetes, and psychiatric distress, like a deep depression or like an experience of mania. And so we say things like, taking antidepressants is like taking insulin for diabetes. And so within this model, it's called the medical model, um, we do sort of talk about it a lot like we do sort of physiological symptoms. And what we do is we go to the doctor when we're feeling distress and pain, and they ask us what our symptoms are. What are we going through? And then they tell us what that means. It's often mediated through the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, which codifies this sort of, based on symptoms, it codifies what each disorder is. And it's kind of like a list of symptoms. Some of them are related and interrelated. You might have 5 out of the 9 symptoms are required for a diagnosis. And what this does is it offers us a very clear retranslation of our experiences back to us. It has this incredible explanatory power for our suffering. It's like, I'm doing this. Oh, I have depression, bipolar, I have borderline personality disorder. And it fits our distress, our struggles, our challenges into this pattern of linguistic and narrative classification that is created by psychiatrists, psychologists, and other medical and mental health professionals. And so because it's done by these experts, it's revered as sort of an authority in the naming, framing, and defining of distress. And they call the DSM this book that lists all the disorders. It's a huge book. They call it a Bible. And it is biblical in the sense that it tells stories of people and phenomena, but it does it under this sort of guise of scientific validity and reliability. And this is really powerful. And I want to be really clear here that there are some really important critical components to mental wellness and care and support that comes from medicine and psychopharmacology. I don't want to minimize that. What I think it's the dominance and the power that feel disconnected from who we are. And Mick sent me this quote from this critical psychologist who I really like, Peter Hegarty, and he draws heavily again on this other guy, Bruno Latour, and I think about them in conversation sometimes. And Hegarty talks about how the medical model invisibilizes the act of translating and the act of mediating our experiences. And so what this does is, like, the DSM and experts occupy the entire space between our experiences of pain and the language of description. And where this translation happens is not within us or from us. It happens externally. And what this does, according to Bruno Latour, is that it makes the space where translation happens unthinkable to us. And Hegarty kind of agrees and elaborates that sort of on the other side of that unthinkable space is this really powerful expertise, revered medical framework. And what it does is it sort of purifies our experience into discrete categories, and it reifies its own construction through its claims to objectivity, fact, and evidence. And I love this quote that Mick sent me, which is from Hegarty. He says, it is the carving up of people into their properly natural and enculturated parts, keeping people in place. And this further elucidates sort of the power of illness creation, categorization, diagnosis. And this is meaning making for our hearts, our minds, our bodies. But it's also defining what is normal, what is natural, what is the place we're supposed to be. And what it does is it kind of forces an assimilation to this dominant, cis, hetero, ableist, white supremacist colonial patriarchy. And it puts, with that big system that we're talking about, like, it puts the power in medical professionals whose words and ideas are objective, to determine what is normal and acceptable. But it's not entirely objective or scientific. The DSM is created and written based on categorizations of symptoms, and there's research that these things all do go together, and they do make sense, and they can be really validating for people, myself included. They have a place. But the place they have maybe isn't everywhere. And I'm not on social media or anything, but someone sent me this this post by Pat, the radical therapist on Instagram, and it's about dysregulation and what would happen if we weren't constantly regulating our emotions, and what would happen if we just let our hearts, our minds, our bodies dysregulate and shout out, call out, transmute our raw emotions and experiences into the unacceptable, unpalatable, wild sort of things that we're calling for. What might that do if we were dysregulated? What might that do to those giant systems of power? But we can't. We have to regulate to be acceptable, to be normal, to be worthy of dignity, agency, respect, and care. And so they're really, like, where do we get to be untranslatable? Where do we get to experience ourselves in non-linguistic terms, or translate our experiences into a lashing out, into something uncontrollable or crying? You know, most people are like, oh, I don't want to cry, and they hold it back. And I think there's something there, like maybe this is telling us something about the world we live in, that we're kind of through this dominant model, sort of keeping everybody in place. But we're also keeping people in a sense of illness and brokenness that need to be fixed. Like when we are experiencing this kind of distress, what I hear from so many people is like, I need help because I'm broken. And there's this sense of powerlessness. People come to me and are like, you know, I need objectivity. I need your expertise. And I say, I don't have that to offer. But I have questions and we can explore. And so for example, if somebody comes to me and they say, you know, oh, I feel so broken, I'll use questions like, what pieces of you have broken off? Where are they? What are they made up of? What are these broken pieces needing, saying, doing in their brokenness? Or like, what about that empty space between all the broken pieces? And what does that mean for you? Or what does that tell us about you? What is the space between those broken pieces say about you? And it can be a little bit like big and who really fucking knows. But that's kind of the beauty of these kinds of conversations, is there's so many possibilities, so much opportunity for meaning making. That's different than the medical model, which operates on these prefabricated sort of language and answers that doesn't leave space, that doesn't ask about those spaces between our sense of brokenness. And the language it gives us, the language it imposes on us, we take that up really strongly. And there was another quote, Mick, you sent me so many good things. There's this other one by Paul B. Preciado, in An Apartment from Uranus. And he says, it is important to remember, for instance, faced with the quote, anti-gender tidal wave, that the words feminism, homosexuality, transsexuality, and gender were not invented by radical activists, but rather by medical discourse in the last 2 centuries. And I loved this because I started thinking about my own gender and how, like, I used non-binary for a while, and then I was like, I don't know what that means. And I think what it did was it helped cis people understand me, but it didn't help me understand me. It didn't reflect anything about me. It was just for them. It's not language by us or for us. And I had this beautiful conversation with a client recently who I asked if I could share some of the conversation that we had in this offering. And what he said is, he talked about how his body limits us in our practice of gender until we learn how to be read by others. But and he continued, there's this like contradiction or dissonance when we start to align things, because he was like, what I feel like I'm doing is really just giving the patriarchy a performance it demands. And I was like, oh shit. And he goes on, I was like, brilliant. He goes on and says that his body is a filter. It's like a filter that makes it kind of hard to move through experiences. And it can be frustrating. Because while he can learn the words and movements, etc., of femininity, he can learn to do femininity so that others understand him, he actually doesn't really understand it from a genuine place from himself. And I think that really is a gap that we're left with in this translation in the medical model. And I just sort of have questions about how there might be power for us to reclaim and embody what we feel, to listen to ourselves and our own stories and experiences. And so how in a gender sense does a performance of gender give us a kind of insufficient validation, just enough to keep doing it? Or like how more broadly do we constrain our expressions, our wants, our needs, our pain, or even our love so that they fit into what is normative and expected? And I'm thinking about like love languages, for example. And can you think about a moment? Now I just have a lot of questions. Can you think about a moment where language couldn't do justice to your pain or to your love? Can you think about how we might be nourished, connected, loved, even when we don't have words to explain ourselves? And what if we allowed ourselves, or were allowed to be untranslatable? If we were allowed to be messy, chaotic, just absolute jumble within the bounds of our skin, unable to rate ourselves on a Likert scale between 1 and 10. That's a big thing in the medical model. How much pain are you? Right? I'm depressed. How depressed? Scale of 1 to 10. And what if we had the agency and power not to answer these questions that don't give us access to our own meaning or resonance? And what if we got the opportunity to foster curiosity and ask the questions we want to ask ourselves? What if we could reclaim our subjectivity and divergence and be unpalatable and be discomforting? Maybe we could translate our dangerous, unrestrainable, uncontainable pain into stories that we could trust, believe, experience together that might help us move through the world. And I guess in order to do that, we'll kind of have to connect and listen very closely to ourselves and to each other, and that's likely how we'll find out. Anyway, that's what I had to offer. Thank you.
Wow. I'm absolutely in a non-linguistic state myself, SJ, from that talk. You mentioned before we started that you had written a lot for tonight, and I am absolutely reeling to read it. And you're opening with inciting us to play in questions, and that not being about being directed towards answers is exactly how I feel in this moment. I'm left with so many questions that feel really powerful, so many of those being ones you spoke to us. And I was trying to take notes to form some questions for you and Claire, but it turned into me just writing verbatim what you were saying so I could return to it. And that makes me want to remind everyone that this conversation is recorded for everyone to return to if they'd like to.
I can also put the questions at the end in the chat, the ones that I wrote.
I'm sure that everyone would love that. Rhiannon and I were messaging behind the scenes saying we'd love that. So now we'd like to invite Claire back, also Rhiannon, and we are going to be in conversation about the talks and readings of the night. And as we said earlier, we encourage anyone who's left with some questions, as SJ has encouraged us to explore, to leave those in the chat for them, and we can relay that here. But to start off, I would love to ask the both of you to for reflections on each other's practices. And maybe Claire, you could start us off and give us a little break from all the talking.
Oh, yes, I totally. Bye, Sam. I just want to say bye to a person in the chat who's saying bye and who has a Zoom thing. I just want to say hi. Thanks for coming and goodbye. Thank you so much for your time. I really want to read a sentence I didn't read from my reading. and that has the word untranslatable in it, and then say something that relates to my experience working in a bookstore and type books. While you're also a person who is me who translates. So SJ, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And yeah, uh, the section I skipped over because, and which is, I know you must be thinking, how could you have skipped over something you already read for so long? Um, it includes like the phrase untranslatable, which I was so happy to hear in your talk because it's both such a good word to invoke, but also such a cliche you almost like can't say it. But also so important that, not you, but like
Okay.
in like translation, it's like I can't hear another person like pick up a book and say, oh, but like and I'm not talking about like, I'm just like, a general public person. There's a very easy, like seemingly sophisticated thing to say about a book in translation. And that's like what is lost in translation, right? Like this is sort of like a thing that is to be said. I really like sort of like the beauty and like what is like not able to be translated. But another thing that can be graphed onto like emotions and feelings is like, okay, so it can't be, in a verbatim translation, or it can't be perfect, but like what is carried over? Has it changed form? Has it changed, key or tenor or whatever? That's nice. So in relation to music, which relates a bit to like the bubble of music that she hears, my character that I read from earlier today, she's playing a song for her Turkish friends, and the song is French. This is me just responding with a sentence from my text, which is, I think, the best way I can respond. And thank you, Mick, we're going to go in for another 10 minutes, everyone. Okay. And so she plays a song in French for her Turkish friends. On the coffee table, Bashung floats the dark waters of Fantaisie Militaire. Amitier is turned towards France these days. He's even bringing a few French bands to the street music festival that's coming up. Wait, before we go down, can you translate this for me? He plays La nuit je mens. Je m'en lave mes mains dans les verres corps à l'élastique. Untranslatable, sorry. Disappointed, he listens in silence. Okay, so I mean, like that's so fun for me because that I love a sentence in a French book that gains meaning in my translation in terms of a thing being, because like that line that's in French in the French book is in French, but in my English book, published so beautifully in the future by Invisible, for whom I hold so much gratitude. Thank you to Norm. Like the that line gets to be in English. Like my translation gets to add a thing that adds the meaning to the text that makes it untranslatable, It's my person who's reading it in English, um, in America and Canada. I mean, there's like a better chance than not that like they're not gonna super understand. Like just to be clear, I know French. I had my ex who was French tell me what that was because I didn't know what Vercors was because like that's a mountain in France. Like I didn't really know what this meant and I spoke French, right? So it's like it's really fun that this line in my book sort of like gets even more meaningful because it's untranslatable in this English version. And that's really fun. So I just wanted to toss that back and be like, I love everything you said about like not translating and I don't, yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, you got me. You might be able to tell when I'm like moving around. I get really excited. Because when you were talking about, first of all, untranslatable, I only speak English, so I only translate through bodies and, other things. And you talk about what was lost. And then my immediate question was like, what's generated in a translation? Like what else is happening when it changes the key or the tenor. And when you talked about adding meaning as a translator, your own meaning, I thought about there's this thing in therapy, in certain kinds of therapy, narrative therapy, where you just reflect back the language that people use. People say, oh, I'm going through this challenging time. You always say, okay, this challenging time you're going through. You kind of repeat it back. And obviously I do that. It's like a way of connecting to people and showing that you're listening. And there's also this thing when people are like, I can't describe it. And they give me all these words. And I'm a real word nerd. And I just I have a word. And I'm like, what about this? And they go, no. I'm like, okay, what about this? And we just like start coming up with like, what words? Is there a word that describes all of that? Or do we need 10 words? And it is kind of like from within me, I do have, as much as I'm like a sidekick, I do have a role. And I do have, coming from a place of like professional, a power that I try to use in like a lateral way so that it's not top down. But when we're doing this work, there is something that we add that it is important that it's me doing the work, that it's my connection with somebody. It's what I listen to and hear in the words that I think might fit for that, or the metaphors. I love metaphors for that. What metaphor can I translate this jumble into? Mhm. Yeah.
Like, keep being so surprised that, like, this is so fun because I keep being surprised that, like, I am seeing the parallels that I'm seeing, and I keep being surprised by the thoughts that are happening in terms of like listening to you, SJ, and like coming quite quickly to like a sort of analog or a counter argument in translation, which, like, for the sake of like language bouncing off each other, I'll say that, like, listening to you just now, I'm like, okay, well, a similar thing I could say is like, I really liked when I like hearing you say that you like repeat language back and like sort of just like taking a client in their terms, right? Not adding terms to it, but like allowing a person to make terms for themselves, perhaps introducing new ones, but very consciously and like with the client's, awareness.
Mhm.
But taking a client on their terms, I really like that. And I think about that as I'm like starting to translate more of this book I have, is like it's also sort of an ethic in terms of not adding to a translation, like taking the words that are on the page and not adding to it. Like,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
that's my only, thing to bounce back is I've been thinking a lot about that as I'm trying to like keep the rhythm of this author that is so tight. I'll now use this opportunity just of talking just to say I want everyone to know that like basically everything I read was one paragraph. There are no quotation marks. Like all of these voices are all like through her. There are no quotation marks really. Um, and that's important too, because she's also taking people, that she's like listening to on their terms and sort of metabolizing them all through this one voice. Um, so yeah,
Mhm.
I love that notion. So thank you, SJ. And yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
it's like a balance of, like on people, joining people in their language and their terms, but also like when there are moments of, um, I don't know, where it's like grappling with something and then it's like coming up with like an access point, a moment, like a word might give us access to something that provides a little clarity, or generates something new within that kind of mess that people are just trying to flail around and find. Um, and the thing that I find really can be can be sort of aligned with the work that you do is that like we're there, and also it's about, this is gonna sound weird, but it's like about bringing someone else or someone else's work, and like it's about sort of like opening a window and then everyone else can kind of like see and learn. I have this like intimate relationship with people, and when they start to start to grow in to expressing and understanding themselves in ways that are like true to themselves, or in ways that feel accurate in the moment, or that are evolving and changing, they go out into the world that way, and it's like the world gets to understand and see that. And you're bringing these stories and these ideas to people in a different way. And I don't want to give myself credit. I just sit in a room and chat with people. But there is something about like, oh, when people leave that room, like they get to do cool things and make changes in the world and be people who like, I don't know, maybe overthrow the government or something. Like, I want to be the therapist of the next revolutionary. That's my job. Mick? Brianne?
I'm snapping in enthusiasm.
Right?
And I'm
Anybody
gonna
else?
take we do have an audience question, and I know
Oh
I
yeah.
said we'd go 5 minutes over, but maybe we'll go just a tiny bit more over. I wish we could go like another hour over because I'm sitting here just beaming, witnessing you two together. But the question from Mary is, can you all please speak to the universality of trauma, both in and beyond all language? Full disclosure, I am a recovering music therapist, now a writer, poet, and professional editor who also volunteers with PEN Canada Refugee Writers. Trauma and translation are salient and figural for me. Thank you.
I don't know.
I'll go because I have a short answer because I want to think about trauma in language because that's what I'm doing tonight is sort of, especially because the two excerpts I read are sort of trauma in language. So I'll respond quite briefly, I think, only to say that like this is a book that um because it won some big fancy prize in France, there was an audiobook of it, which is like pretty rare for like it's an independent press. It's the first time a book from an independent press won this prize in 60 years. It was a big deal. I have an audiobook of the author reading it. So I've actually been listening to her read it to me since 2020. And I especially, I listened to it. I've been listening to her read the book to me, which makes it feel like really natural now. Um, but despite like having done that, because I was doing the translation of that paragraph I read, it was the first day I Googled the name of the woman. Has my tech problem been resolved? Uh, Thanks. This is me adding data to my plan. This is the idiot who hasn't had Wi-Fi installed in her apartment yet. Okay, thanks everyone. Just quickly, like, um, despite having heard that passage so much, I hadn't Googled the case. Like the thing that I read relates to a case. If you Google Silem, Turkey, you get this like famous national case. I didn't know about it. And despite having heard the author read this to me for so long, I hadn't read the details of it. I had like sort of been hearing the words in English, "Dear future, I am ready," like on her t-shirt. And like today it was really grounding and like beautiful to sort of see the reports of it, to be grounded in the details of it, to be grounded in the language of it. Like it was such a famous case. I was grounded in like, Al Jazeera reports about it and like a ton of others. And like that was really nice. And like despite having heard this book read to me by the author for 5 years, I had never actually made the connections or like done the specific language work to like ground it in time. And like there's obviously no answers to the question, so I'm not gonna like apologize that this is none, but like it was actually so moving to me today to be grounded in this like sort of like historical trial, in the language of it, in the reports of it. Even though, of course, I knew that this book was based on fact. I knew that all of this like had happened, and it was really nice to learn more about it and to realize that like I had been understanding the words in French for years, but I hadn't really like done the reading about it in English, and like that felt nice. I recognize that. That's a weird answer, but I'm gonna go to SJ now.
Oh, yeah, lean into the weird stuff. I don't, I always do. Um, I'm not sure I quite understand what you mean to the universality of trauma in and beyond language. But what I will say is in experiences of trauma, well, trauma is actually what happens after violence, harm, something that makes us feel unsafe to a point where like neurophysiology would sort of like tell us that our prefrontal cortex shuts down, our limbic system also goes offline, and then our what they call our like reptilian brain is sort of like right at the core base of our brain. Then that comes online and it's very instinctual. When that happens, it's what happens after that that results in experiences of trauma. So it's violence, and then trauma is the result. But trauma isn't inevitable after violence. And one of the things that can be really like preventative or supportive or can really mitigate the impacts of people's experiences of trauma is after an experience to have someone there physically, emotionally, mentally, who is compassionate, who is loving, who is listening, who is validating, who is believing. And that might come out through language, but it has to come through also other ways. It has to come through with the body. It has to come through like an emotional connection so that people can feel grounded and safe with somebody else or with multiple other people. And that's not to say they won't experience the impacts and the aftermath of violence, but it can really support what happens and the degree to which the experiences of trauma are the distress and the pain, how big that gets. And so there are some, our bodies kind of a lot of our bodies function in very similar ways, more similar than different most of the time. And so there is something physiologically and I think emotionally that we hold. And it's almost like you wouldn't need to speak the same language necessarily to support somebody in the aftermath of violence. That's what I'll say.
Thank you so much, SJ. I think those are very good, wise words to leave us all with for the evening, and a good place for us to wrap up as well. Thank you so much, SJ and Claire, both of you, for that conversation, for the reading, and for the talk. I'm so glad this is recorded because there are many, many different points of the evening that I personally will want to revisit, and everyone will be able to do so as well once the recording is up on YouTube. So yes, thank you so much again. Our next Cross-Pollinations will be taking place April 30th, I believe, last Wednesday of April, on the theme of climate, ecology, and health. We'll be joined by the poet Shanice John Muhammad and an as yet to be determined healthcare worker. But we really look forward to seeing everybody there. And I'll have one last moment of appreciation for SJ and Claire before we all head off for the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, SJ and Claire. I feel like my whole body has just been getting waves of shivers. Just like, and also the subject matter, Claire, of what you selected for reading just tied so wonderfully with like the radical somatic politics of your talk, SJ. And I knew this was going to be amazing, and it was just beyond what I could have ever imagined. And yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah.
It's such a great room, and the two of you, you got a lot of wonderful messages in this chat. So, yeah, lots of support. Such a wonderful audience.
Thank you so much.